Hi, my name is Lily and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my reading vlog for Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. So I started off by going to Waterstones to buy Fourth Wing. I had actually got this on click and collect, so I had a look at some other books, and as you can see I did get tempted, but I didn't buy either of the books I'm about to show you. They were just ones that I was very much considering and decided not to. In a minute I will give you a summary of Fourth Wing, don't you worry. So here is my haul from Waterstones. I was only supposed to be picking up Fourth Wing, but it was double stamps weekend, so we got carried away. First up, we have Love in the Time of Serial Killers. This is an adult contemporary romance following Phoebe, who is a PhD candidate obsessed with true crime and writing her dissertation on it, who begins to suspect that her new next-door neighbour is a serial killer, but actually, is he just there trying to capture her heart? Then we have The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren, which is about a reality TV show producer who makes a new show about a world-famous romance author trying to fall in love for the first time, because has she been practicing what she preaches? But what happens when they start to fall for each other? And then we have The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence, which was a total cover buy. This is an adult fantasy about someone who lives in a library and someone who lives in a deserted part of the world, and how their stories begin to intertwine over space and time. And now here's the one that we all came here for, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. So if you don't know what this is about, this is an adult fantasy / fantasy romance according to some people. This one follows Violet, whose mother is a general in this world, and her mother orders her to go and join the Dragon Riders quadrant when she comes of age instead of trying to become a scribe. The problem is Violet is disabled, and everybody knows that dragons don't bond with fragile humans. Every year there are fewer dragons willing to bond with cadets, and so she knows she's going to have to fight with all of her might to get a dragon and survive. With every day that passes, she has to prepare herself for the war that is growing outside in the kingdom, and for the fact that the protective wards are starting to fail. But the more time she spends in the quadrant, the more she starts to question if things are being kept from them by the higher-ups. There's only two ways out: graduate or die. Okay, so this was supposed to be a bank holiday reading vlog, and then it hasn't. The bank holiday's over. But I have now reached page 100 of this book of Fourth Wing, and I don't really know what to say without spoilers. It's very interesting. I'm enjoying it so far. It's reminding me of the pitch for A Deadly Education, which I haven't actually read, but this feels a bit like what I imagined A Deadly Education would be. But also there's another book it's reminding me of, and I'm really struggling. I think maybe it is Divergent that it's reminding me of, because I did read the Divergent series when I was a teenager, so maybe that's what I'm thinking of. But yeah, it definitely feels nostalgic in a weird way. For me so far, the sexual content, there's not been anything actually happening, but a lot of like pining and finding people really attractive. It feels kind of out of place for me. I don't know if it's because the writing feels kind of YA, and it was reminding me of YA dystopian, and then to have the main character be so like horny all the time just feels kind of weird. I don't know if I'll get more used to it and start to understand it a bit more, but I can't help but think if I was in a life and death situation like this, the last thing I'd be thinking is how hot people look with their tops off. I don't know, maybe that's just me, maybe that's just the demisexual in me coming out, but yeah, it feels very out of place to me. But I'm not against it. Like, I'm not saying I would take it out. I mean, I would take it out, but it's not terrible, so I don't know. It's going okay, and I am definitely interested in it. For me at the moment, it would be sitting around a 4-star read, but it is very gripping, and every time I put it down I do think, oh, I want to read some more, so that is a really good sign. I really struggled to put it down and go to bed on time last night, so I think that says a lot. So yeah, so far it is pulling me in. I am surprised by that because it's not dystopian, but it feels like the dystopian books of my teenage years, which are very not my thing anymore. And I think without the hype I never would have picked this up, but especially because it's blurbed by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and I really didn't like From Blood and Ash, so that would have put me off, but everyone's been selling it so much and I'm really glad I picked it up. Okay, so I've made it up to page 207 and things are definitely moving really fast. I thought this book would be more about riding school and being in first year than it was. So by this point we reached the threshing. There won't be any spoilers, don't worry. But yes, we've got to the threshing and I'm just a bit like, it seems like it came around really fast. It felt like in the book it talked about it being a far off thing, not happening for quite a while, and then suddenly, ta-da, we're at the threshing. I didn't really feel the impact of a lot of the deaths that I saw happen because I didn't feel connected with anybody, because it did feel very quick and like there was just a lot of people, but I am enjoying it. So I have had that I just want to read one more chapter feeling. Last night I was paying attention to getting to page 200 rather than what time it was, and I accidentally stayed up an hour later than I meant to because I was just so engrossed in the book. So that's a really, really good sign. I have been really enjoying it. I like our main character. I think she's funny. I think she's sassy. But I did find she's so respectful of all the dragons until that one moment in the threshing, and then she's not anymore, and it just kind of confused me because she was so careful to be so respectful and then suddenly she wasn't. But I did think what went down in the threshing, part of it felt very obvious. I feel like I knew from very early on who she was going to end up with. At least part of what happened at the threshing I saw coming from a mile away. And I think most people would have based on the book and the way it was written. But I wasn't expecting all of it. And it's definitely had some twists. The romance side of things, I am enjoying her having kind of sparks with Xaden. Is that his name? Is that how you say it? I can't remember. But the bad guy. And I am looking forward to seeing how that develops, because that's definitely going to be the road we're going to be going down. The friends to lovers storyline, there's like a slight love triangle we're in, I'm not loving. It feels very Gale from the Hunger Games. And I'm really hoping he has some kind of unfortunate ending eventually, because he is really annoying me. But yeah, that's it so far. I am enjoying it. I'm really looking forward to picking it up, and I'm hoping I'm going to finish it over the weekend. So we will see. Okay, I'm now 300 pages in. I'm really enjoying the different relationships, seeing how they are developing and seeing how the marked ones are sort of changing their attitudes a little bit towards, oh my god, what's her name? Violet. And I'm enjoying seeing her relationship with Xaden grow and develop, and Dane as well. And we're getting some more insights into Violet's past, which is interesting. I was told it changes at like halfway through, but I'm like 60% of the way through and I still feel like it's not that much of a difference between the first and second half yet. Maybe it's not kicked in properly, but so far I'm enjoying it, enjoying the way that it's going, and yeah, I am looking forward to seeing what happens next. I just wish we got a little bit more detail around like the training and how things are developed, how they're taught to do different things, because it feels very much like I learned to do this instead of like talking about how they're taught. And I found it a bit confusing trying to keep up with who has their magic powers yet and who doesn't. It would have been useful to have a clearer indication of that, but other than that, I'm really enjoying it, and I definitely have that just one more chapter feeling, and I can guarantee when I get to the end of this book I'm going to be really annoyed that the next book isn't out yet. Okay, I'm now just over 400 pages in, so I'm on the final stretch. I'm definitely going to finish this book today. Things are getting really interesting. So we are starting to see more people come into their powers, which is really interesting to see how they all work together, seeing the squads coming together and forming more realistic teams. We've had some very satisfying deaths, which I never thought I would say, but there's some people who needed to die who have now died in this book, which is great. And we're seeing the romantic tensions peak and get really interesting. There was actually a sex scene in this section of the book, and I would have to say it was actually very tasteful. I mean, it was very graphic, but you know, but I didn't feel like it was unrealistic or cringy. There was no awkward dialogue. It was a bit over the top, but it's a fantasy book, so it's always going to be a little bit over the top. But yeah, I really thought it was a good sex scene that fitted into the story and didn't feel out of place just for the sake of having a sex scene. And I thought the way that we got there was really good. I'm really enjoying seeing Violet come into her own and bond more with her dragon and just seeing things develop. So that was really interesting, but there's definitely more going on than we are being told about. There's this air of mystery that I feel like the last 100 pages a lot's going to get revealed and then it's going to be cut and you have to wait for the next book to find out how it gets resolved. My only complaint so far has been that the author has a tendency to have the chapters are very long, and then at the end of a chapter there'll be this like plot twist, like somebody appears and they're not supposed to be there, and so you want to read the next chapter to find out what happens, but then rather than the next chapter continuing that scene, it jumps to like the next day or a few days later and you don't get to see how it gets resolved, and you just kind of get told in the past tense how it got resolved, and I'm not a big fan of that. I feel like we're missing out on a lot of tension, a lot of interactions, a lot of dialogue that would be really interesting to read about, and I'm not a fan of using that bait and switch in books because I feel like you build something up for your reader only to not give them anything in return, so that's been a little bit frustrating for me. But that's really the only thing I've been struggling with in this last section. I'm getting a bit worried that some of my faves are still alive, and I worry they're going to be brutally killed off in the last 100 pages, but we will see. I feel broken. This book was a lot and it was amazing. So, to start off with, I am rating this 4.5 stars officially, but to round it for places that require rounded stars, I will be saying 5 stars. I will be shocked if I read a book in June that will beat this for best book of June. I'm blown away. So, is this the most original fantasy book? No, absolutely not. I could see most of the plot twists from a mile away. There was very heavy foreshadowing. It follows a lot of the general conventions and tropes of fantasy books and fantasy romance. So it's a very predictable book, in my opinion. But it is so well written and so compellingly written, you cannot put it down, and you enjoy it anyway. It's kind of like when people say, how can you read romance books over and over again when you know what's coming? But the real art of writing romance is in the writing. It's not in the story arc, because they're right. Romance itself is inherently very repetitive and very formulaic. And so generally in a romance book, you'll have the same kind of arc. But if a romance writer is good, you'll want to read it over and over again because they draw you in with their writing. And that is 100% what Rebecca Yarros has done here with her fantasy book. And I think that is because she is a romance writer. She wrote romance before this, contemporary romance, and now she's writing a fantasy which borders fantasy romance, but I think it's more of fantasy than a fantasy romance. And I think those years of her writing romance, contemporary romance, has really taught her how to write in a way that draws in your reader, even if the story is not the most original thing in the world. Like, we've all read magic schools, we've all read dragons, we've all read dragon magic schools, probably, I definitely have, but the way she has written it and the way she has made her characters feel so alive is what makes this book so good. So in the last 100 pages, we had a death that I'm really sad about. I really didn't want that death to happen. There were two characters that I knew both of them couldn't survive to the end of the book. I knew one of them was going to die, and if anything, this is the character I would have preferred to die. But I think if the other character I was thinking of had died, it would have been more impactful. But either way, I was very sad that this character died. And lots of characters die in this book. But that one's definitely the one that hit me the most of all of the deaths in the book. There's a really epic battle scene in the end, and I really enjoyed it because I find fantasy books is often two ways that battles go. Either they describe it in a lot of detail, or the battle is kind of a few pages long. You get told this happened and this happened and this happened, and it's very quick. Rebecca Yarros goes really into the battle scene and really explains beat by beat what is happening, goes into all the detail, and it's so good. I really felt enthralled and engaged. I actually had to pause halfway through the battle scene to go and take my dinner out of the oven, and I did not want to. I stretched it out as long as I could to try and make sure I could finish it, and I just couldn't because she was going into so much detail and it was so amazing. And I think it's a unique talent to be able to write an epic battle scene that's not boring or too fast, but to also be able to write sex scenes that are not boring, cringy, or inherently misogynistic. So I think she's a very talented writer, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing where this series goes. From what I understand, she has announced on TikTok 5 books in the series, but the publisher in Instagram comments has been hinting that it could be extended beyond that. So whether that means the series could end up being more than 5 books, or if she's got books planned outside of this series but in the same world, who knows? But I am here for the ride. I'm definitely going to be continuing this series. I loved this book. So the reason I'm taking a 0.5 off is because it is not the most original thing I've ever read. I did predict pretty much all of the twists coming because I've read this book before, but not as well written. I will say that. It wasn't the most original, and I did get frustrated, I think I said this in my last update, with her bait and switch, with cliffhanger endings at the end of a chapter where someone will walk in the middle of a scene, and the scene ends at the end of the chapter, and you expect it to be picked up and to see the resolution of that dramatic moment in the next chapter, but she instead does a time jump to the next day, and you just get told in past tense what happened in little detail. And that was very frustrating. I wanted more scenes where we actually got to see the whole scene through to fruition, and it definitely felt like a bait and switch situation. But that didn't happen too often that it really annoyed me, but when it did happen, I just got a bit, I wanted to see that scene. So yeah, it's a solid 4.5. If anything, even like a 4.75. Like, it's so close to being a 5-star, but I just didn't get that, like, this is a 5-star read vibe from it because of those two little niggles. Like I said, it's just not original enough for me to be able to give it 5 stars, but I just love it anyway. You know, like I think a really original 5-star read for me would be like Six of Crows. I've never read anything like Six of Crows. I have read books like this, so I don't feel like I can give it a 5 stars because I have read this book before. Or not this book, but I've read a lot of this before, and I just predicted too much of it for it to be 5 stars. I think there was only like one twist in this book that surprised me, and that was in the middle of the book. So I still really enjoyed it. I think you can feel my energy through the camera here, through the screen. I loved it. I have already pre-ordered the next book from Waterstones, although I'm going to keep a sneaky eye out to see if she does any signed editions, because if she does, I will cancel that pre-order and pre-order a signed edition if I can get one in the UK. And one thing I haven't talked about is the representation in this book. So what I really liked is we had a range of races, although I do wish it had been made a bit clearer that they weren't all like one race, because I think it was mentioned at the beginning, but then it wasn't really discussed throughout the book. But we did have kind of this mixture of sexualities where no one's labelled, but it seems to be very accepted in this world to like the same sex, like multiple genders. There wasn't any discussion around people being trans or anything like that, so maybe that's something that could be explored in future books. But yes, sexuality seems to be very fluid and open and not very defined in this world, which I really enjoyed. We had side characters who were having same-sex relationships and it was completely normal. There was no kind of homophobia about, which I loved. And then our main character, it's not explicitly stated in the book, it's talked about weak joints and things like that, but based on my own knowledge and the fact that the author has this condition, I do believe the main character has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which I struggle to say, but its abbreviation is EDS. So what you just heard was the sound of me accidentally hitting the mute button on my microphone and not realising. So I'm here to try my best to recap what I was saying, but it was 4 minutes left of this video and I don't remember everything I was trying to say. But what I was saying was that I do believe that Violet has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is also known as EDS, as the author has this condition, and it very much matches up to what Violet was describing. I really, really liked that there was a disability that got accommodations in a fantasy setting instead of trying to be fixed, removed, or just being treated entirely as a burden. I really, really liked that we got to see people genuinely trying to make adjustments, especially certain characters, and the fact that it wasn't treated as like a special ability either. She was disabled and they made accommodations, and I loved that, and she still did really, really well despite everything. To be quite honest with you, I don't remember what else I was trying to say. So my summary from editing me much further in the future than filming me is that I really enjoyed this one. If you liked Divergent, I would highly recommend this, especially if you thought Divergent could use some dragons. It's not as brutal as I was expecting. It's mostly because I couldn't connect with a lot of the characters, and it's not the most original. I wouldn't be surprised if you can see most of the plot twists from a mile away. But I think it's still worth reading because it is so well written, so fun, and such a good time. And I'm honestly really sad that the audio cut out here because I was getting really passionate talking about it, and I wish you could have heard how excited I was about this book. I'm not a huge fantasy reader these days, so the fact that this book grabbed me as much as it did and I loved it as much as I did really, really says a lot. So yeah, that is it from me. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. All of my social media links are in the description below, and if you'd like to leave me a comment to let me know you are here, of course you must leave a dragon emoji in the comments below. Thank you again for watching. Bye!